Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Learn to Make the Most of Your Relationship with AI. I'm Allison Ryder, Senior Project Editor at MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm really excited about today's program, which features Sam Ransbotham, Shervin Khodabandeh, and Prakhar Mehrotra. Sam is a professor at the Boston College Carroll School of Management and the MIT SMR Guest Editor for the AI and Business Strategy Big Ideas Research Program. Shervin is a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group, where he co-leads BCG Gamma, the organization's North American AI practice. Sam and Shervin are two of the co-authors of the recent MIT SMR BCG Global Executive Survey and Research Report, Expanding AI's Impact with Organizational Learning, which is our fourth annual study of organizational AI adoption. They're also the co-hosts of the popular podcast series, Me, Myself, and AI. We're fortunate to also be joined by Prakhar. He is Walmart's Vice President of Machine Learning, where he's one of the top executives focused on AI. He was recently awarded the Franz Edelman Medal by Informs for significant contributions in data science and advanced analytics. He's also a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and serves as a peer reviewer for top conferences and journals in AI, including the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence Conference, the Conference on Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition, and the International Conference on Autonomous Agents and Multi-Agent Systems. Today, our speakers will share some key insights from the 2020 research, namely that organizations see the most success with AI when humans and machines learn from each other. Prakhar has some concrete examples from Walmart, so definitely pay close attention to those. Without further ado, Sam, I'll pass things to you. We can get started. We'll all turn off our cameras now so folks can enjoy the presentation.
Hi, thanks, Allison. I hope that I turned off my camera and not my microphone. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got an amazing number of people on the webinar already. It's pretty intimidating. As hosts, Prakhar and Shervin and Allison and I we'd like to think that this huge number is because of us, but deep down we know the real truth, and that's that AI is really important for businesses right now. And we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about it. Our main finding is that machine learning involves much more than teaching machines. Don't get tripped up by thinking that we just need to teach machines to do what we know how to do and that everything will work out. Instead, organizations that are leading with AI focus on mutual learning between machines and humans. I'll start the webinar talk by motivating this with a couple of questions for you about how your organization and artificial intelligence are working together. After that, Shervin is going to explain some of the detail behind our main findings. And then, as Allison mentioned, we're thrilled to have Prakhar with us to give us some practical examples. In the meantime, please do send any questions you have in. Allison is collecting those even as we speak, and we've got a chunk of time at the end to see exactly what you're interested in hearing more about. So first, how did we actually do this? We're going to talk about the research. What is the research? And well, what the research is that we fielded a survey. We gathered more than 3,000 responses from managers and executives around the world. We then combined those survey responses, and you'll see some of those in some charts and graphs that we have coming up. But we combined those with some detailed interviews with executives and academics across many industries. And the idea is that we can pull out a rich report that's both broad and deep. And we published this report. It's called Expanding AI's Impact with Organizational Learning, that describes those findings in details. So here you see a list of some of the companies that we talked with and some of the executives that we interviewed. We really appreciate their help in developing this. I want to take just a second to describe, Shervin's going to go into more detail in a second here, but I'd like to put this in a little bit of context. This is the fourth annual report about AI in business that MIT Sloan Management Review and Boston Consulting Group have worked on together. If we thanked everybody that worked on this, it would take most of the time we have today, but Shervin, Allison, and I would be remiss in not mentioning David Kieran, Francois Candelon, Michael Chu, Bert LaFontaine, Rodolfo de Charma. This is a group effort for sure. Our first report, we entitled Reshaping Business with Artificial Intelligence. It looked at both the technical infrastructure and some of the understandings of artificial intelligence that are necessary for organizations to begin the process. It spoke to some of the optimism and some of the potential for artificial intelligence. We followed that up with a report about artificial intelligence gets real, which got into some of the pragmatic issues that people faced as they began to use AI more and more in organizations, and found that maybe it wasn't quite as easy as they originally had hoped or expected. The next report was Winning with AI, and really focused on the relationship between organizational strategy and artificial intelligence. We found that organizations just can't have a strategy for AI. AI isn't something you make a strategy for, but instead people need to have a strategy with AI, a strategy that used AI to achieve a business strategy. And this year we're focusing on organizations' impact, getting more impact, and finding that some organizations get more than others, and trying to figure out who does and who doesn't. So with that setup, that's the broader context. What we'd like to do is help place this in a more personal context for you. And we'd like to ask you a couple questions if you will take the time to do that. So first, does your organization have an AI strategy? As I mentioned, some of our prior reports directly focus on that relationship between AI and business strategy, but we're curious what's going on in your organization. I think we'll give you like 30 seconds or so to respond to this. And as they're answering, I can mention that our first report found that about 63% of the survey respondents expected new business value from AI implementations in the coming 5 years, but less than half of those respondents had a business strategy that involved AI. And since that report, that's changed a bit. But before I tell you how it's changed, let's see exactly what your organizations are doing. It looks like about 28% of your organizations have an AI strategy, but about 54% don't. And then we have this mystery 18% who are not exactly sure. I think that's interesting. So that's a different sort of perspective than we've seen from our strategy, our overall strategy. And I actually thought that this group might be maybe more interested, have more AI strategy than our global audience does. Maybe it's the people here on this call are looking to learn more, whereas maybe some of the people we're talking to already know some. In the past years, I think we've seen that our ambition for AI was there, but action was lagging. Early on, organizations seemed to expect a lot of change, but really didn't have ways to achieve that change. But we're increasingly seeing about half the organizations do have a strategy with AI, and actually Shervin will get into some of the exact details. Let me follow up with one more question here, and that's to ask if your organization is getting significant financial benefits. We want to think about the magnitude of the changes that are happening. So it's clear that AI can improve, some particular process or some specific activity, but to what degree is your organization getting significant benefit? And by significant, we mean significant. Is it affecting 5 or 10% of your organizational revenue? Is it $100 million type dollars or more? In short, how much, is the benefit from artificial intelligence significant yet? It looks like we've got, actually, so this is an interesting result here. Looking to see how it's playing out. It looks like at this point about 13 to 15% say that their organization is getting significant financial benefit, whereas about 46% are saying that they're not, and then we have the not sure's. That actually aligns really well with our global survey. So if you think about that, having that sort of financial benefit is rare. It's not that everyone who is adopting artificial intelligence is getting these level of significant financial benefits. So what is differentiating the people who are from the people who are not? And I think Shervin is going to talk more about what makes those organizations who are getting this benefit, like about 15% of you are, what's different about those than others. So I'll switch here to, I think Shervin will step over here.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone. So I think this result I would say is pretty consistent, right? So we're seeing about 60% have some sort of an AI strategy, about 11% get some impact. I'd also add a few statistics. 90% of organizations would say they believe that AI is critical and they have to figure out something to do with it. So there's clearly a desire. I mean, the major takeaway here is, as Sam, you mentioned, there is a big gap between ambition and impact. And so this report's really focusing on what do these 11% do that are getting significant in the order of tens and hundreds of millions for a typical multi-billion-dollar company. And I think, you know, Allison and Sam, you guys sort of gave the answer, right? Which is what these guys do is that they make humans and AI play nice together, right? They facilitate environments in the organization, and by that I mean full systems, right? For AI and humans to collaborate, to learn from each other in such a way that both the machines and also the humans get smarter. They typically establish multiple ways for humans and machines to work together and learn from each other. And they do this in systematic and continuous ways. And this is really what we call organizational mutual learning with AI. For this to happen, a lot of building blocks have to be built, right? So I'm just going to describe this page because there's some numbers here. So what you're going to see is these percentages is basically the likelihood of getting significant impact, the way we defined it, from AI, right? So first, you've got to want to do something with AI, which is what we call the discovery phase, right? This is what there is a strong desire to do something. There are limited deployments in very select and narrow applications, and there are some proofs of concept, minimum viable products. You know, these are organizations that are curious, have some activity, have some POCs, and what is the likelihood of impact is actually quite low. It's 2%. It's almost negligible. The next stage is what we call building AI. And this is where there are truly concerted efforts in the organization to build the foundation in data, in technology infrastructure, in digital and AI platforms, to hire the right talent, and as Sam mentioned, to create a cohesive business strategy that uses AI to drive real business value. And actually, that's where most of the lift's coming from. Now, organizations that do these have a 20% chance of getting significant value from AI. Next step is scaling AI. Now, this means going from the building blocks and the building of AI, from the production of AI to the consumption of AI. In other words, to implement AI in business processes, do it in multiple business processes. It also means not just looking at AI as a means of automation, but actually deploying it in revenue-generating functions in the organization. Companies who do this double the likelihood of getting impact. So by this point, they're at 40%. Now, the last stage, which is really what we're going to talk about mostly today, is about achieving organizational learning with AI, right? This is about building feedback loops, establishing these continuous ways where humans could learn from AI and AI can learn from human, knowledge sharing between humans and machines. And also it means allowing and facilitating multiple ways that humans and AI can work together. Organizations that do this have another 34% chance of getting value, right? So effectively, what the research shows and the interviews sort of corroborated is that this is the secret sauce of these companies. So the major takeaway here is, first of all, significant impact is possible. Many foundational building blocks have to be taken, but pretty importantly, technology and data science is absolutely necessary, but far from sufficient, right? You see the major lifts here are coming from really that strategy alignment that Sam talked about, going beyond automation and putting AI in business processes. And the biggest one comes from sharing knowledge and different roles that humans and AI, can play together. And that's the secret sauce of the 11%. I want to spend a little bit of time on what are these modes of learning between humans and AI, right? We will discuss 5 modes here on this page. You could see from AI dominant on the left, where AI is pretty autonomous, makes decision, implements decisions on its own, to human dominant, where human actually owns the process and the judgment, and AI is a advisor, a helper for that to happen. And so the most important takeaway here is all of those organizations that are getting significant impact are heavily employing almost all of these modes to a large extent. So let me spend a little bit of time on what are these different modes of learning between humans and AI, and then Prakhar will give us some real-life examples from Walmart. So you see here these 5 modes, and we've labeled them to make it simpler to understand. So the one on the left is automator. So what does that mean? That means AI has the full context and information and ability to make pretty autonomous decisions, and human is really unnecessary, right? And so a good example of this would be in credit fraud prevention, right? Every time you swipe your credit card at the transaction point, an AI engine quickly decides whether to authorize it or not. There's no human intervention needed, and humans would actually slow down the process significantly, bring it to a halt, frankly. Another example would be in the manufacturing process, where the precision AI engine would look at different parts that are being built and would throw away the defective parts, right? Pretty much faster than a human could do that. So that's sort of the automator role. There's a lot of value here, but that's just a sliver of the value, right? The next one is the decider. So what happens here is AI is actually making a decision, but human has to implement that decision. So AI is sort of identifying things that have to be done and making decisions on almost what needs to be done, but the human has to validate and implement. So a good example here would be in predictive maintenance, right? So you can imagine a electric grid. An AI engine would say what part of the electric grid is likely to go down, or what part of a manufacturing production line or a chemical plant is in danger of failure, and then engineer reviews it and then executes it. It goes there and fixes it. Another example of this is in retail industry, where the AI forecast engine would say what the demand could be for a particular item in a particular store at a particular time, and then the human manager or operator at that store acts on it and makes sure that that item's available. Now in the middle is where human and AI interactions are a lot more, I would say, iterative, right? Where AI makes a recommendation, but humans decide. And a good example that's recently becoming really popular, and I wouldn't have expected this being a chemical engineer myself, is in chemical plant operations, where AI engine suggests tweaks in the reaction parameters, pressure and temperature and flows and reactor mixes and things like that, to increase yield. But the engineer makes those decisions or pushes back on the AI engine, and so they sort of work together to optimize the yield. The next one is the illuminator, and this is a pretty interesting mode. These are inherently creative processes or processes that require a fair amount of human judgment and human sort of institutional knowledge and wisdom. But what AI can do is it can process and inform this information a lot faster, and then also allow human to see things that he or she might not have seen. So a good example here is in industrial design or in automotive design, where AI engines suggest many different design ideas for a given design objective. So you want, let's say sleek lines or a particular, aerodynamic profile, but you also have some engineering requirements. And AI starts suggesting ideas, but that the human actually makes the call. And then the final mode we want to talk about is the evaluator. Here, the stakes are actually quite high. This is where human needs to decide, human needs to act, and human actually has a lot of the ideas, but needs quick validation. So a good example here is in complex scenario analysis or war gaming, where there's multiple big ideas that are proposed by humans, but the implications and pros and cons of these ideas are hard for humans to fully understand because there's second order and third order effects, there's implications. And so AI engine could quickly say, look, this is the idea you have, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen to cost, here's what's going to happen to people, here's what's going to happen to process. I mean, a good example to think about this is what like chess masters today use AI engines to explore novel strategies, right? They might see 10 or 15 or 20 moves ahead, but they cannot see 100 moves ahead. And this is, again, where AI is really evaluating the human ideas. So with that, I'm going to pass to Prakhar to share with us how he's leveraging all of these modes to really drive significant value at Walmart.
Yeah, thank you, Shervin and Sam. I think the most important point that I'll start with is the fact that when we thought about AI at Walmart and incubating some projects, these 5 modes or the 4 modes, it was not an afterthought. We thought about it, okay, on a particular problem, we want it to be an automator. Like, we didn't call it the term automator, but we said that, look, we want to fully automate this and we want to be intelligent. Or in some cases, we said that, no, it's actually man plus machine. So we spent a lot of time upfront deciding that. And so the examples that you will see, I'll elaborate more on that. So yes, in the first example, it's an automator. And so an automator, the good example would be how we do pricing, especially clearance pricing for unsold inventory. In this particular example, in this particular case, the AI has all the necessary context to figure out how should we price an item so that I can sell it by a specified date, right? Like as Shervin mentioned, humans would actually slow down this process. Walmart has millions of items, and so pricing them and finding the optimal price them is completely automated. And there's a feedback loop that is built in it, meaning every time we make a mistake or something doesn't go right, or it learns, an agent keeps learning. And so over time, it becomes smarter and smarter and smarter. So in clearance pricing, the AI agent has all the context. Humans will slow down this process. And so right now, this is completely automated inside Walmart. So that's a good example of an automator. Decider, so this all of us would have felt it, especially during the pandemic world, the substitutions or the smart substitutions on online grocery orders. So online grocery is a way where you can use an app or online and place an order, and either associate will go into the store and fulfill it for you and pick up the groceries for you and then have it delivered. And so what happens in the real world is that in the real world, and this happens with every retailer, there are out of stocks, and out of stocks can happen because there is way more demand, there are inventory issues, and so while AI has all the context to make the decisions that, look, if certain item is not available, should we get some other item based on the consumer preference, you actually want that human touch. You might have seen this, say it might be asking you, oh, this chicken is not available, the chicken breasts are not available, should I get thighs for you, right? And also the issue of freshness of the item. And so this is where AI makes 95% of the decisions that this might be the smart serve, but then you have this last human touch, which helps in managing exceptions. So decider, this is a smart substitution, a good example of a decider and how we implement it inside the company. Recommender systems, it's classical machine learning. Online shopping and replenishment systems are a good example. I think Shervin touched upon that. So if you go to the next slide, I actually have 2 examples here. And replenishment is a process in retail where every retailer and every node, we have to refill our items, right? And so that involves calculations of lot of metrics like consumer demand, stock availability, safety stock, etc., right? And then all is that fed into the algorithm to decide the best order quantity and best time to place the order. However, being a marketplace, you actually Walmart doesn't manufacture stuff like and so we need to have some context on the supply chain of the vendor, right? So especially during pandemic times, right? Uh, like algorithms can say, oh, I need these many toilet papers, or we need these many Clorox bottles because that's what the demand says. But somebody has to manufacture them also, and so that input is needed. So I have to make large number of decisions, but doesn't necessarily have all the context all the time, like lead time variations, availability, schedule constraints. So that's where human input is needed. That's a good example of a recommender system. The other example is classical online shopping. We all must have felt it. You buy a TV, in this example, buy together and save is a good example where, let's say, you purchase a TV online. Algorithm will say that, look, you know what, maybe you should also buy a TV stand. And that's a good example because here, like, it's recommending you. It doesn't necessarily have the context whether you have a TV stand a priori or not, or you bought it from somewhere else, but it's trying to recommend you, but you decide whether you want to buy it or not. So it's classical recommendation systems. Is a good example for recommender. Illuminator, assortment is a very good example. Like we as a human beings, our tastes, our preferences, our the way we shop is constantly changing. It's actually changing at a much more rapid pace than one could imagine. And so here, thing is that AI has all the necessary. AI can provide the context on like what the customer shopping patterns are by geography, by time, by season, by historical purchase pattern. But then there is this element of innovation, right? Okay, you know what? I think we should. We should have more organic items in this, or we should have XYZ merchandising, or this color might be trending in apparel, and so you use AI and machine learning to basically generate all these insights into how the consumer's pattern is shifting and what attributes are important. And then you basically, the human, in this case merchants, basically take the decisions. They go find the best pricing on it, they negotiate with the supplier and figure out what is the best way to put it in our stores and our fulfillment centers, and have it available online for you to shop. So it's an example of how AI is used to generate insights, but then there's a lot more work that needs to happen for it to actually become a reality. And a human innovation is very important here. So assortment is a good example, what items to carry and how many. The last example that I have, I think, is evaluator. The best example is you can think of as an extreme events. So if you go to the next slide, Sam. Extreme events are like natural disasters, COVID-19 pandemic, right? The stakes are very high. There is not enough context in the historical data. And so the way we think about situations like this inside Walmart, let's say there is a cyclone that is hitting certain area, there are floods happening. And so then we have to have our stores open and fulfillment center and distribution centers open. So what do? We basically use the AI in reverse, where we say that, look, humans, you pass through many scenarios as possible, and this is where human ingenuity and comes into mind, like as Shervin was talking about. Like we will pass on scenarios. Okay, no, how should we think about refilling water supplies, like water bottles, like food and consumable items. So the way AI works here internally is that it parses through the anomalies that it has seen in the data when the time was normal, and then it uses that to try to answer what might happen in these extreme situations. And it also tries to, as Shervin was mentioning, it also tries to tell you what is the impact on the network that is going to happen, right? If you were to take such a decision. And so in this particular case, humans generate many situations, multiple scenarios. AI tries its best to come up with an outcomes, assign probabilities of success, but humans take the final action here. And so that's an example of evaluator. And as I mentioned, in all of these examples that we incubated in the company in Walmart, we thought through it. we don't actually want, when we think about extreme events, these algorithms to run every day. Like evaluated is about reducing the search space. We don't want to calculate the probabilities. What will happen if tornado comes in January, right? Like we don't like, and so we put efforts in the algorithms. Just enough efforts in the algorithm and try to find the just right balance of man plus machine to make it work. An example of clearance pricing, the first example of Automata that I gave you, the decision was unanimous that, look, it has to be completely automated and it has to be intelligent. And so we built it that way. The core, there's a feedback loop that is built in from day one. So on day one, every time it was making a mistake, the results were not good, but over time it became smarter. In Decider and Smart Subs, we said that, look, you know what, reality of retail is that there might be situations where they're out of stocks. Freshness might be an issue. So we will always have humans take a final call, right? Associate might take a final call in exceptions happens. In Illuminator, we said that, look, assortment, humans, the way the customer preference keeps on changing. And so we want to generate a lot of insights, and how we procure those items and build our supply chain is a different ball. And so we will use AI to generate insights. So those were the examples that how we thought about AI in the company. I'll hand it over to Shervin, I think.
Yes. Thank you, Prakhar. Really, really illuminating, and thanks for sharing all the detail. So we've seen that there are 5 major themes where humans and AI work together and learn from each other, and Prakhar has given us some real examples. What we're also seeing in the report is very interesting insight, is that organizations that put in place more modes of learning get a lot more value, right? It's almost an exponential effect. So organizations that do primarily one mode, very sort of single dimensional focused, right? So only Automator, right? Or only Illuminator get some value. Once you get to 3 and 4 and 5, this value sort of geometrically increases, which is really, really interesting. And it also talks to the rest of those building blocks that we talked about, because you could imagine organizations that do 5 modes, like what Prakhar talked about, have already put in place a fair amount of the building blocks, unified their strategy, have scaled it across multiple places. So it's not surprising that they get a ton more value. The other thing that I think is inherent in this data is that to do this kind of collaboration requires a level of trust between human and AI. And Prakhar gave us very good examples, right? With assortment, with recommender system, all of those things. The people that are making those decisions and have sort of made those decisions in the past without AI have to learn to begin to trust AI, but they just cannot trust AI blindly. And this is another very important insight that Prakhar shared with us, is that that process of building that trust is not an afterthought. So another way of thinking about it is this change management that has to happen actually starts on day one. That collaboration between the users of AI, the consumers of AI, the process owners, the store managers, the chemical plant operators, all of that has to happen at the very first stage of the design. Those modes have to be discussed and agreed and developed together, rather than by a highly, highly technically focused group that builds a bunch of things and then 2 years later tries to force that on the rest of the organization. And this is really, I think, why this is so hard. But the silver lining is that there is significant impact that's possible. There are organizations that are getting it. There are steps that they take to get it. And we've heard a very good example right now from Prakhar. So.
Excellent. Thank you all for this talk. I've been frantically looking at and responding to some of your questions. Others will be asking live to get our speakers' expert opinions on those. Before we jump to that, we did just want to share with you all, and these resources will come across in an email you'll get, and they're of course included in the slides that are accessible to you in the handouts module now. Some resources that may be of interest to you as you continue to explore this topic and learn more about AI. So our 2020 Artificial Intelligence and Business Strategy report, which, as you have seen, we've leaned heavily on in this talk. That chart that you saw at the beginning and all of the data is there and explained in a bit more detail. So I think we will speak to that a little bit more in the Q&A because a lot of you have had questions there, but for a real deep dive, that's the place to go. There's also a really nice interactive summary of the report on BCG's website, so that link is provided as well. And the podcast mentioned at the beginning, on which Prakhar has joined us for an interview and talked in a bit more detail about some of Walmart's specific AI applications, can be found via that link there also. So with that, I think we're ready to start our Q&A. So I would invite our speakers to turn your cameras on and we will jump right into some questions. Unsurprisingly, we have quite a few questions for Prakhar and your organization's implementation and use of AI. So we'll wait for you to pop on screen. Excellent, thank you. I think I want to start, Shervin, as you were walking through what I call it the step chart, the sort of looking at these different phases of AI. A couple of people are asking, well, do you have to go through each phase linearly? And are there smaller moments, kind of naturally required chronological steps? So if you guys could speak a little bit more to that, maybe starting with you, Shervin. How does that work? Do you have to follow that path linearly?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I would say we've seen both. We've seen both in our research, and we've seen both in our work with various companies. There is more and more the proof points are that more and more organizations that do this in a more agile way, so that they take chips at each one of these things a little bit at a time, rather than completely methodically go build the entire infrastructure first, then hire all the data scientists, then work on your AI strategy, then take it. So we're seeing that some organizations that take the time to go really, really step by step actually get a lot slower, because they're crossing every T and dotting every I, and that's actually slowing them down. And more we're seeing organizations that identify the big bets that they were going to take with AI and focus on those big things, but that they do that in concert with building the underlying platforms, deploying AI in multiple environments, and getting that collaboration between the users of AI and the builders of AI going. Like, that's the most important step, as Prakhar said, is to get that collaboration going. There's some building blocks that have to be built, but they don't have to be entirely fully built for that those steps to work.
One of the things that we didn't really mention, we didn't really call it a step or a path on purpose, because we wanted to step away from that, required linear thinking. Not that we didn't feel like that there was some sequencing involved, but we didn't want to maybe be quite that prescriptive.
Yeah, and I think inside Walmart and in my previous experience, there is a little bit of a stochastic element or non-deterministic element in AI. Like, we don't know these algorithms. So what we did was we started small, little bit, like very, very small, quickly come to a conclusion in the scientific community this could be possible or not. And in parallel, leadership was deciding on all the operational challenges and organizational challenges and change management, and adding together. As I think Shervin mentioned, the decision was not just by one group of people. We all have a seat in the table. And it was collective group, and look, you have to make some bets. There is AI, right? So that's what we thought, the parallel process, how we do it.
But Prakhar's being a little modest here too, though, because you've got a little bit of infrastructure in place at Walmart, I think. So it's not like you said, well, let's try a little bit of something. You're building off a huge existing infrastructure, which has given you the ability to try those things. So I don't want to.
No, I think that's right. Like, I think in that big companies have that advantage, that they have that infrastructure built in place. A small firm might not, so they might have to think more clever ways. So.
Yeah, I would say, just to add to that, it's a balancing act, as you're saying, Prakhar. But it is also the fact that the companies who actually did build that infrastructure, we're seeing that in our work, is they were a lot more successful in handling unexpected events. Like when COVID hit, companies that had that infrastructure were able to very quickly deploy AI to that final mode of scenario analysis and wargaming, because they had a lot of that infrastructure already built. So there's a lot of value there. The key insight, for me, is it's not all or nothing, and is a balancing act, and that right equation varies for every company
and for every situation too. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits that I think Prakhar's pointed out, is that they haven't just figured out one way to do it and it works. They figured out lots of ways to do it, and they figured out where it works in that scenario.
Your answer there is touching on some other questions, and I think it's probably fairly logical to folks what the answers will be, but I'll ask them anyway. Matthew asks, and Prakhar, I think this would be directed to you, do you recommend building and developing in-house, or is it cheaper or more efficient sometimes to determine your pain points in-house and then approach outside experts? And I'd imagine that answer depends, but coming from where you sit inside a large organization, how would you approach that question?
We believe in in-house development, primarily because if something fails or the world changes, we want to reuse the algorithm, we want to reuse the learnings, and not only the algorithmic learnings that we had about the consumers and about the problem, but also the investments that we have made in humans in change management. Right, like this feeling, this philosophy that look, AI and humans have to exist together now. Right, to me that is the phase where we are in, and so this culture that it is in-house is what we are striving for. And then there are significant algorithmic data science retention, like there are many things that go past happen. So.
I think Sam, Shervin, our research a few years back, we did look at build versus buy. Maybe that was 2017, so it was a while ago. But as we think about that, what considerations did companies have? What were the dependent factors as they were making those choices?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, build versus buy is it's a pretty broad question, because there are a lot of assets that are commodity-like assets that could be purchased, right? That you could buy or you could contract with. And if you look at the AI provider landscape now, where there's thousands of players, and you looked at it 10 years ago where there was like 5 or 10, it's evolved a lot. So what we're seeing is, as Prakhar is saying, a lot of the iconic companies that want to really get meaningful impact and transformational impact in the long run want to own the core capability, because that this intellectual property of the company, it's this, they've already recognized the human and AI collaboration. They don't want a bunch of black boxes that nobody understands because somebody else has built. But there are elements in the ecosystem that they buy, but they carefully put that together. There's certain elements, there are certain let's say computer vision algorithms or video processing algorithms, or sort of off-the-shelf things that are already commonly available. They could buy those pieces, but more and more I think they're controlling, and they could get some help, they could get external help and all that, but just more and more the idea is let's own the core IP and the core algorithmic development, because that's the only way you can control the implementation.
And I think it's also about tuning, right? Like you want to tune this as the world is changing. I really wish the world was stable. The world driver is not. So and one thing I've realized is having this space is everybody wants to interact with AI. They just, like, as a data scientist, you would write a code. As a business person, you still want to touch it. You still want to feel it. You want to have that control. That's our inherent nature. And so, and you don't know a priori that answer, right? And so, as like when we said that we'll do automate clearance pricing, yeah, we have automated it, but there's still merchants who say, no, can I tune this, right? And so now, how do you do that? So that's why building in-house is very important. That was how we do.
Yeah, like everything else, I'm sure we've seen over the years how important data is for artificial intelligence, and so most of that data is internally located. I'm guessing, Prakhar, he can speak to this, but you're not inventing new algorithms, I'm guessing. So it's really more about the tailoring those to the particular situation. One of the fun interview quotes from a couple of years ago that they wouldn't actually let us publish was, and we had to say anonymously, was someone expressing a lot of frustration with outhouse with purchasing from not in-house, because they said, hey, I'm expecting a worker here, and I'm not getting an 18-year-old. I'm not even getting a 12-year-old. I'm getting a 3 or 4-year-old type of worker when I'm purchasing AI, and I've got to train them up to be a productive worker within my organization. And that ties well to what we're finding here, is that interaction between humans and machine is going to have to happen to at least some degree in-house. And maybe that's a greater degree than some of the past ERP or past implementations that could be more removed.
Prakhar, when you were talking about the extreme event prediction, you just kind of touched on that a little bit too in your last answer. It brought up a question for a couple of people about what inputs do you use to predict that? I mean, that it's such a tricky thing, and we hope we won't have to do it again, but I'm sure we will. So how, just to get really tactical for a minute, how did you actually, what did you input into those algorithms?
Learning from anomalies and learning from very small data or very little data when you have little context. We are wrong in that. Like extreme events, like predictions are wrong. It's not like we exactly knew that how many toilet papers would be there, or we don't. Like it's not right, but it is directionally right. And so we use evaluator in not as a regression problem, i.e. we are not exactly predicting how many units, but more as high-low. The demand is extreme, is in 75th percentile, is in 95th percentile, and that's where human experience comes in. Like somebody who has done this for the last 30 years or 40 years knows exactly how to build the supply chain to that, how to open the stores, how to supply the water bottles, right? Like they know that. And so internally, we go like, and extreme events happens. They might not happen at a national scale. We will call it pandemic, but they happen locally in certain regions, right? At very, very small regions. So we try to look at parse that data. We collect all it together, because there's in all these extreme events, it's an anomaly. Either there's massive consumer demand, or there's massive dip in consumer demand in certain items, and we are trying to see how fast it can come back. What do I need to do to the network, right? So that's how we are learning. And first shot we are wrong. Like the AI also doesn't know, it's not that intelligent. But the second shot we are right. Third shot we are more right. Fourth shot we are more right. That's how we use it.
Hey, Shervin, you know that what that harkens back in my mind is the first day is the worst day from AI, from the quote from DHL from our podcast, that when Gina was talking about that what comes across when listening to Prakhar right now is, just a philosophy of approaching AI as another worker that's sometimes wrong. Like, I have been wrong before, and Shervin does not yell at me often. So, he recognizes that there are going to be some pros and cons, and it looks like Prakhar and Walmart are recognizing that there's going to be times that AI is not perfect, and that's again some of that mutual learning part.
Yep. And I think it's also it's very consistent with the thematic of multiple themes, right? Because if you think about how do you form any relationship with AI, how do you it's just not one AI for everyone. It's just like saying, how do you form a relationship with a human? There's not a one size fits all equation, because humans are different. And I have friends. Some of them I look for advice. Some of them, I look, to go jogging with. Some of them, friends in general, relationships play different roles in our lives, and we leverage our relationships and our networks in the right way that's mutually beneficial to us. And I think that's sort of the theme here, is that don't think of AI as a fully automated black box. It's just going to come and figure everything out. There's one mode, is the automator, which humans build, and we talked about that. But by far, a lot of these modes are about a mutual relationship and the right kind of relationship for the right kind of AI, or the right kind of friend, or the right kind of person, given the right situation. I think that's very true, Sam.
Yeah, and that's
maybe we switch this.
No, I just would say that's an expectation that we have. Like, so the person who, when we are using AI in an evaluator mode, nobody expects it to be 99% accurate. Like while when we are doing clearance pricing, of course, like there's a financial liability, right? Like there's reporting every time, so it's a expectation, as you said, like I have 5 different friends.
Yep.
So Prakhar was talking about sometimes AI is wrong. I'm curious, like Prakhar, do you ever end up being wrong about the mode? Have you switched between, you gave examples of how you got to modes. Have you been wrong about the mode before? And I don't want to put you on the spot here, and I should have cleared that question beforehand, so you can redirect somewhere else if you want. But is there a time where you've had to adjust between those learning modes in a way that you didn't plan?
Yeah, we had to adjust, especially we are still in the process. Like in assortment might be a good example, where the world has become increasingly omni, and so how do you should it be automated, right? What should it be a decider, right? Like, or it should be illuminator, right? Like, can when the world is moving towards more personalized pricing, personalized assortment and geographical based assortment, like where like I want the item that I want in like 1 hour delivery. How do you build your network that way? And it is increasingly, like, to me, I think 4 years from now or 3 years from now, it will be a decider. Where machine, because we would have got this much data, but right now it's an illuminator, right? And so if you ask me this question 4 years later, if I'm right, then it will be a decider. But right now, it's an illuminator.
That's just like saying in the friend analogy that I'm not just going to take whatever Bob or Fred is telling me anymore because he led me the wrong way. I think actually I'm going to start debating with my friends, and maybe that's not the right mode for me, right? So I think there's just a real strong analogy between relationship building between humans and different types of humans for different situations that we're just seeing more and more. And Prakhar just gave a great example of that.
So we're talking about no one size fits all approach, choose the right big bet, things of this nature. It's a nice segue into this question about, are there any faulty assumptions or pitfalls that leaders might fall into that you've uncovered through the years of research that you would just advise people, like, hey, here's a watch out for you, as you just think about in general, implementing artificial intelligence in an organization?
I can't help but take the bait on that one. Like, I think Allison may be
Please.
trolling me here a bit on this. Yeah, I mean, sure. Let's find out some great things that humans are good at, and wouldn't it be gee whiz if we could make a machine do them? And people pursue that gee whiz, like, hey, we can get a machine to do something that a human's great at. That seems so misguided to me. Like, you already have a human that's good at it. Why would you try to replicate that? I mean, let's look for the things that people are doing poorly. Like Prakhar mentioned assortment. I mean, nobody's good at going through billions of items and figuring out where they go. You're setting me up on that, because I just think there's too much like trying to get the gee whiz. A machine can do what a human did before, without thinking through, like Walmart has done, which is the right mode to go with.
People are thinking, Shervin, oh, go ahead.
No, I'll just, from a leadership point of view, I think I'll tell you what's the most difficult job part that I have. It's trying to understand the data as a data scientist, having some knowledge about that, intuition, and then going in front of leadership and taking that bet that, look, it might work, it might not work. And that, I wish there was a formula for that, or like an equation for that, like you have in classical sciences, but it requires certain element of intuition. It requires certain element of that. Like, you want, like, when I remember when I was making a case that, look, I think we can automate clearance pricing, I think we can do this. I didn't have much, like, I had just enough right number of experiments to make the call. If I was too late, I would have lost the momentum that I had leadership. If I were to go too deep in science and say, let me do perfectly, and then I would do all the possible experiments in the world and then go in front of leadership, I would have lost the momentum that was there for AI. If I went too early, then I'm risking too much. So right at the shot, and I think that is my hardest part. Right, what is that right sweet spot? So that's what I would say.
The other thing I'd add to what are some moves that leaders can make or shouldn't make is, if when you reflect on what Prakhar shared with us and sort of the overall research, right? This is going to be hard, and these kinds of hard things aren't going to just happen, 55 levels down in the organization by themselves. And this is one of the other reasons where we see like organizations that are actually doing a ton of proofs of concept and a lot of sort of only research, but they haven't really thought through the implementation or these modes of learning and the sort of, how do you begin to embed these things into business processes like assortment and pricing and all these things that Prakhar talked about. That's why we're seeing these organizations aren't getting much value. So I think what we're seeing in the research is there are some moves that are sort of required. And I would say, one of the most important ones is, what is our strategy here? And how can AI really drive our strategy? Like that has to happen at the C-suite level. There has to be a desire. The second thing is, for humans and AI to work together, a fair amount of process change has to happen, and that's hard. And so that also requires, again, leadership commitment and backing of the groups that are implementing these solutions and building these solutions. And then the third thing I'd also say, there's a need for investments. These algorithms aren't going to build themselves, and the data and the technology layers aren't going to build themselves, and the process isn't going to change itself. And so, and data and people aren't just going to get degrees in data science all by themselves. So we have to invest in all those. So I would say those are the moves. Maybe a pitfall, would be to focus entirely on one of these, get it all perfect, and then the next one and get it all perfect, and then the third one. But that actually do this in concert is something we've seen in our research as well.
It is a conditioning of the mind. It's a conditioning of the mind, because like it will, like in my experience, it will fail on day one. Like it will, like you will be wrong. And so to me, the first meeting when you go show the results is the hardest meeting. It's like, oh, how will people react? Like, oh, it's not what it's like. Oh, we didn't do, simulator was wrong, right? Okay, we didn't get 80% what we were expecting. And so at Walmart, I have been lucky that the leaders are patient, right? They're patient, right? And so that's part of the expectation setting in the management that we have. Like as a data scientist, as a person on the field who is implementing this, doesn't feel pressure, right? And it's because the nature of the work is that. So that I think is, I'm very lucky that I have bosses like that. So.
There are so many points I want to make and questions I want to ask, and we have about 60 seconds. So we did get a question that is very open and it's complete greenfield, but I'll ask each of you to give a brief answer to this. In what area does AI still experience limitations? There are so many, but what's top of mind to you? First thing that comes to mind.
Expectation management.
I think causality. Like, did this actually happen because of Y? Did X happen because of Y? Like causality is like we are very far away from causality.
Shervin, I'll give you the last word.
I'll give another thumbs up for causality.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for giving this talk today, for the insights you shared. Thank you to the audience for joining us. BCG is our collaborative sponsor on this research. It would not be possible without their support, so we greatly appreciate that. We have all of our studies available via our website. We'll be sharing that information with you all, so you can take a look at those at your leisure, as well as access the podcast if it's of interest. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.